Hi, hi. This is Rethik, sir, your biologist SME. So how's your preparation going on? Right, in the previous test, you have covered 8 chapters from comparatively. So both 11th as well as 12th topics, you have almost completed 8 chapters. So today, from now on, we will once again discuss, revise those important topics or concepts from all each chapters. Okay. So today I have chosen human reproduction as most of you asked me to come up with some basic concepts. And in that, I have taken fertilization and implantation, which is very important. Why fertilization and implantation? Because in order for the embryonic development, fertilization should happen, and later on, implantation should happen for the development of the embryo. So that's the major reason. And almost, if you are focusing on Neet oriented, so one question, a kind of statement based or tricky questions are being asked majorly based on this topic. That's why I'm concentrating on this topic as a first video. So one thing that we know when I'm talking about fertilization, which is very important. So what do you mean by fertilization? The process of fusion of sperm or sperms, single sperm, good, sperm with whom? With an ovum. So is called as fertilization. It is actually called as what? Fertilization. So in order to happen fertilization, certain things are very important, right? It won't happen magically. So how does fertilization normally happens? Say that during the copulation, what happened? Sperms are released. Okay. So sperms are released during the copulation by the penis to where it has been released. It is being released into the vagina. That is, this process is actually called as insemination, right? So this process is actually called as insemination, where during the copulation, the sperms has been released with the help of or released from or by the penis where into the vagina of the female. So this process is called as insemination, where sperms we know they are motile. So they swing and they move rapidly, passes through these sperms, swings, moves and all, and they pass through cervix canal, and later on it enters into the uterus, and finally, it reaches to the finally reaches to the which region it normally reaches? It reaches to the am ampullary region, right? So where does this ampullary region located? Ampullary region of fallopian tube. Right, good. So yeah, that's good, cool. So what you can see here is this is the fallopian tube and this is the ampullary region. Just a minute. Yeah. This is the fallopian tube and this is the ampullary region. So where finally what happens, the sperm enters into the like what are the sperms, right? So they pass through the cervic canal and enters into the uterus, and later, it normally reaches to the ampullary region of the fallopian tube. This is the fallopian tube basically. In the ampullary region, it normally passes. And the same thing goes, right? Because what happens, this is one thing. And the same thing also goes here. Like, see, what happens when come to the ovum? So sperm is released and it reaches. We just get to know how it normally moves through the from the vagina, especially from the cervic canal, to how does it reaches to the ampullary region of the fallopian tube. So what about the ovum then? So ovum is also released, right? Ovum is released. So how it is actually being released by ovary. So where this is, if this thing I consider as ovary, so now ovum is released by the ovary. So then it is again transported to the where it has been transported to the ampullary region of the fallopian tube, right? So simultaneously, ovary and transported to the Same. Ampullary region of the fallopian tube. And both happens simultaneously. Very important. Both the process, right? Both happens simultaneously. That means when the sperms are released equally, ovum should also be released. Then only fertilization will happen. So if ovum is released but sperms are not released, or if the sperm is released, ovum is not released, then fertilization won't happen. That's why, even with the proper copulation also, that means without any problem, even if a couple undergo, if they actually do copulation, okay, even with the copulation also, fertilization won't happen because if both the ovum and sperms are not released simultaneously, then there is no chances of fertilization. With whom the sperm is going to fuse or with whom the ovum is going to fuse when one is absent, right? So that is the basic concept that we need to have in our mind. So the process, as I told, of fusion of both sperm as well as ovum is actually called as fertilization. Cool. So during the fertilization, there is certain way because we know that there are millions of sperms are being released in the through the semen and everything, every sperm, they have the motility, they move, they swing, right? So and reaches out of all those sperms, only one sperm is what which is going to fuse with the ovum. So how it is going to choose, how the ovum is going to choose, and how it is going to restrict to the other sperms during the fusion and all. So let us understand that part. Okay, like in this graph, as you can see, how the sperms are entering, they're coming, and how they're been entering into the ovum. So, yes. See, one thing is during fertilization, what happens? A sperm comes, as you can see, these sperms, right? They comes in contact with the which region? So, can you see this region here? So, this is actually called as zona pellucida region, right? So this is a region where normally sperms they come in contact with each other. I mean, this is the very first region where the sperm it comes in contact. So which is one of the layer, which is the outermost layer of the ovum. So what happens? So this actually acts as a membrane, which normally blocks the entry of the sperm. So what happens is once a sperm, any sperm out of all these million sperms or lakhs together, so once any one sperms they come and they get contact with the zola pellucida region, immediately it acts as a blockage, okay, to the other sperms and it won't allow the other sperms to get enter. So this is what the zona pellucida function is. So that is the reason why once the any one sperm reaches the ovum and it get enters, at least if it reaches the ovum, immediately the zola pellucida act as a blockage or a barrier to the other sperms so that any other sperms don't get enter into the ovum. Clear? So what happens? So in such a way that only one sperms get fertilized with the ovum. So that means it normally ensures the this zola pellucida region will ensures the entry of only one sperm. Right. So one sperm can fuse with the ovum or fertilize with the ovum. This is clear. So there has to be a secretion of acrosomes normally, where acrosomes are present on the tip of the region of the sperm. So there is some acrosomes, right? So acrosomes are some kind of enzymes. So these acrosomes, right? So these acrosomes help the sperm to enter into the cytoplasm, enter into the cytoplasm of the ovum through this region, that is zona pellucida or pellucidae region. Okay, through the region. And what happens? The plasma membrane that we are talking, and zona pellucidae region and the plasma membrane. So now what happens? This completes the fusion of the male and female, and we need to understand only the head region get enters into the ovum. So now the ovum also has a nucleus, and the head region, what it consists now? Only the nucleus now. That means the head region consists only the genetic material and the nucleus. So now what happened? This induces what? The completion. And once they got induced, so this leads to the completion of what kind of division takes place. This induces, once after the fusion, right, it induces the completion of, that is, meiotic division. Once the sperm and the ovum, that means they fuse right together. This is going to induce the completion of the meiotic division of the secondary oocyte. So that means what happens later on, again, the second meiotic division is also an unequal division and result in the formation of secondary polar body. And another one thing will be the haploid, you'll have the haploid ovum. So what happens? So we know this oogenesis, right? So during oogenesis, two eggs are released. So one is secondary polar body will be released, so which is incomplete. Then another thing will be haploid ovum will be released. So now what happened? The sperm is going to fuse with the haploid ovum. So to form what? Diploid zygote, right? So to form what? That means normally the sperm, the nucleus of the sperm, right? It normally fuses with the, even this is haploid. Okay. So this fuses with the haploid ovum. So to form what? The diploid zygote. Okay. So now can you say me how many chromosomes will be present in the zygote? How many chromosomes? 46 chromosomes. How? Because 23 chromosomes from each parent, right? Haploid and diploid. What is the difference between haploid and diploid? N and 2N. Yeah. What is this N and? So number of chromosomes, right? So basically, how much chromosomes will be present in haploid? Half of the parental chromosome. That is 23. Cool. So that's for in zygote, we will be having totally 46 chromosome in human beings. This is what I'm talking about in the human beings. So this is how normally fusion takes place and fertilization takes place. Ooh. And coming again, we need to remember one thing, that how after fertilization, how the baby has been decided, the gender of the baby is being decided. So again, it becomes a very big question, right? I mean, how will we get to know, how will the chromosomes, whatever it is going to, identify what kind of gender it has to be? So as I told, how the baby gender of the baby is being decided by the chromosome. So what happens is we need to remember that the gender of the baby is actually being decided in the early stage. Okay. During the after fertilization itself, the gender of the baby is being decided. How? Because when I'm talking about the chromosomal pattern in the humans, where it is, so I'm talking about the chromosomes pattern. So what happens is in the chromosomes pattern, basically in the human female, right? In the human female, you'll actually see a kind of X and X chromosome. Okay. And in the male, so you'll actually see X and Y chromosomes. So as a result, what happens? Both are haploid. That is, see, all the haploid, that is, the female gametes will be ovum, and it will be through sperm, right? So what happens is the gametes in the male will be obviously the sperm, the gametes. So this is clear for you. Right. So now what happens is during the fertilization, what happens? The female, as we know that the chromosome will be X and X. So that means what kind of gamete it is going to give? X gametes. So what about in the male? So 50% will be, and they are haploid. This is another very important thing. Right. Both are haploid. what I mean to say you is, so it will be 50-50% of the, uh, you know, parental genome or parental chromosomes will be fused together. That's what I'm trying to say you here. That is, this one of the gamete, that is X gamete, will be haploid in nature. Okay. And even here also, either you will get X chromosome or Y chromosomes, which are again haploid in nature. So they are gametes, X gametes or Y gametes. See, during the fertilization, obviously we know that the female is having XX chromosome. That means the gamete produced will be only X. So to this, okay, if the male produces X gametes or if the male gives the X gamete, then what happens as a result? You will have X and X chromosome. So if the X gamete has been fused with the Y gamete, as a result, we'll have X and Y chromosome, right? So depending about, it all depends on the sperm carries which kind of chromosome, carrying whether X chromosome or Y chromosome. So after fertilization with the ovum, so based on that thing, whatever the gender that we get, that is sex we get. So if it is XX chromosome, okay, for example, if the zygote will be having XX chromosome. So the zygote will develop into what? The female. And if it carries X and Y chromosome zygote, it is going to develop into male or boy. So now in that way, what we can generalize or what we can say is the sex determination of the embryo, that is in the initial stage, is actually defined by the that is the male gametes. So if the male gamete it produces the Y gamete, then it will be the female. If the male produces the Y gamete, it will be the male. So now, in one way, we can say that the sex determination is actually based on not the sex determination, but the sex of the baby. Actually, it depends purely on the father, not the mother. So this is one way how we can say in what way initially during the initial development itself, how the sex has been determined. So this is clear to you. So based on this also some questions might ask. So very important thing is, let us see what are all the questions that comes, okay, in the end, initially after knowing how exactly the sex has been determined. So fertilization happened and zygote is developed, right? So initially after fertilization, initially during after the fertilization, after the fusion, what did I told? It undergo the what kind of division you will see actually immediately after once the fusion happens, right? So the entire the thing fusion will happen, that is both the the nucleus from the, what do you say that? So yeah, now we have learned like how exactly the sex has been determined. So as I told, after the fertilization, what happened? Implantation happens. So how exactly the implantation happens now? Sorry. Yeah, that's cool. See, what happens is, um, one way is immediately the mitotic division takes place. Okay, so mitotic division starts place where the zygote, it starts moving. Okay, it starts moving through the istium and of the oviduct, and it starts moving. How? Through the cleavage process. So can you see this? They're actually called as cleavage process. Through a cleavage process, where it starts moving through the to the okay, it starts moving towards the where it starts moving towards the uterus. Clear? So it starts moving through towards the uterus region. This is the uterus region basically. So what happens during this initial momentum after fertilization? Cleavage happens. So cleavage forming 2, 4, 8, then 16 daughter cells, and they're called as blastomas. Okay. Initially they are being called as blastomas. As what happens, the embryo develop, right? Embryo with which are actually of 8 to 16 stage here. Okay. Embryo which has 8 to 16 stage. of the blastomere is actually called as morula. So morula is like 8 to 16 blastomers. Okay. So which is actually called as what? Morula stage. So what happens? Again, this morula, right? You can see the morula here. Again, this morula, it continues to divide, okay? And then it starts forming the blastocyst, continuous from the blastomere to the blastocyst. And you can actually see how the blastocyst is. So there is an arrangement in the blastocyst, right? So what happens? We have the inner mass here, this blastocyst, right? It starts moving further into the uterus. And like this blastocyst, it starts moving further into the uterus. As what you can see here is the tropoblast formation. That is the outermost layer of this blastocyst, right? The arrangement you can see, again, different arrangement. See, in the blastomere, what happens? The blastomere in the blastocyst are arranged into the outer layer. This is what the way it has been arranged. Okay. So this is actually called as trophoblast. Okay. They're actually called as blast. And we have an inner mass. Inner group of cells are also present, which are attached to the trophoblast. They're called as inner cell mass. Can I call them as inner cell mass now? Yes. So now these trophoblast layer, they normally gets attached to the embryo. They actually develop as an embryo basically. That is the inner cell mass. Basically, they normally develop as embryo. So what happens? The outer layer, that is the trophoblast, then they get attached to this endometrium region. So they get attached to the endometrium. And later on, this what the inner cell mass that I've been talking, right? They get again differentiated. And later on, what happens? Inner cell mass, they will again differentiate and they start rapidly cell division and they start, develops into an embryo. So as I told you, the result of this blastocyst, right? Yes. So they become embedded or they're attached completely and embedded into the endometrium, right? So as a result, endometrium of what? Endometrium of the uterus. As a result, what happens? So this will start covering the entire blastocyst as a one layer. Okay. And this process or this entire process is actually called as implantation. So through the implantation itself, what happens is later on, the accessibility or whatever the nutrients which are required for the development of the embryo from the mother, everything is being provided. Clear? So, and as you can see in this figure, this is what the inner cell mass will later on starts developing a rapid cell division to start development as an embryo. So after the implantation itself, one can actually say that, okay, now that she is pregnant. So that means after implantation itself, it finally uh, leads to pregnancy. So this was all about the fertilization and implantation, right? So now let us discuss some major questions on this fertilization and implantation. So I want you to answer properly so that I'll reveal the answer. Okay, only two questions are there. And but I really want you to read the question, understand what question has been asked, and I want you to answer. Receptors for sperm binding in mammals are present on where they're actually present. Just now I have discussed. Have been present in option B, option B, option B. Yeah, option B. And you know what exactly why the reason is, right? So what is the receptors basically which are present, which helps in the sperm binding in the mammal? ZP3 receptors are actually present in the mammals, right? So that's the reason. Now, the last question, it's actually based on, that's what I told you. It's based on assertion and reasoning kind of question, a kind of tricky question again. Given below are two statements. One is labeled as assertion A and another one is R, which is reason kind. So A, what they're saying is the endometrium is necessary for implantation of the blastocyst, right? So R is in the absence of fertilization, okay, the corpus luteum degenerates. That causes disintegration of endometrium. Now you need to understand this very carefully because somewhat they had come up with a concept called menstrual cycle And again, they have come up with a concept called implantation, both. See why endometrium is very important here. Attachment, right? So what happens is the trophoblast layer, which I was saying, that gets attached to the endometrium, and the inner cell mass, right, gets differentiated to form the as an embryo. So trophoblast, it attaches to the endometrium layer of the uterus. So therefore, what happens? Endometrium is actually very necessary for the implantation of the blastocyst. So this is correct. Reason are, in the absence of fertilization, if fertilization doesn't happen, so obviously what happens? The corpus luteum, right, that is the outer layer, gets degenerated. That causes disintegration of the endometrium. That means it doesn't conduct. So what could be the right answer here? So both A and R are true, and R is the correct explanation of A. Or both A and R are true, but R is not the correct explanation of A. A is true, but R is false. A is false, but R is true. So can I consider that there is no way there is an interrelation between corpus luteum degeneration and disintegration of endometrium, right? Endometrium is where the implantation normally occurs. But if fertilization doesn't happen, implantation will not happen. So what could be the right answer here? But both the statements might be right. But R is actually not a correct explanation for A. Yes, both A and R are true, but R is not the correct explanation of A, as I told you. Because both are different now, and we need to understand that endometrium is necessary for the implantation, but implantation, if the fertilization doesn't occurs, obviously implantation will not happen. So as a result, what happens in the absence of fertilization? The corpus luteum obviously gets degenerated, so which is obviously going to cause the disintegration of endometrium. That means obviously implantation will not happen. So that's the simple reason, and this is why. Yeah, breakdown of this endometrium will actually leads to the menstrual cycle. That's it. That's it for this topic. And again, I'll be coming up with another topic, that is pregnancy and embryonic development, okay, in the next video. So stay tuned, and yeah, I'll be discussing again very important question in the coming video also.